A lot of enterprise IT projects are not moving at the speed you would expect. Instead, they crawl. And it's not because we don't have the tech. We have AI, automation, open source, you name it, and we have it. But timelines keep slipping, and the cost of delays keep piling up. Rob Hirschfeld, CEO and co-founder of RackN, has been watching this up close with some of the biggest IT organizations in the world. Today, we are going to talk about why execution is slowing down, where companies are tripping up, and how to actually fix. Rob, from what you are seeing, why are so many IT projects taking longer to deliver, even with all the tech we have now today?
It's really frustrating because we see this all the time in enterprise, and RackN deals with some of the largest, but also most effective IT companies in the world. And we see them having incredibly high tolerance for projects that take years to execute. And, we're in a world where new projects get dropped on people's plates without them being able to control it. Exiting VMware is a sudden priority that nobody put on their plates. And we're watching companies really struggle with this idea of, wait a second, replacing VMware is going to have this domino chain that disrupts every IT system that they have. And so the cost of being stuck in a platform or having trouble onboarding a new platform or onboarding a new vendor, onboarding new hardware, adding cloud or repatriating back from cloud, every one of these projects, they take a long time. They're very difficult to execute. That costs companies money. It costs them innovation. It really makes it very difficult for them to pursue a more aggressive IT posture that could save them a lot of money or lead a lot of innovation. And you asked the question, why? Part of the challenge is that when it takes a long time to execute projects, we have a tendency to grant permission for teams to break off and then execute a project solo, do it independently. So we have seen this quite a bit. They've called it shadow IT in the past. And some of this is the debt accumulated by years, maybe even decades of shadow IT, where a company has said, oh, I need to execute this one thing. Because it's going to take 6 months to execute the project, that team goes off and builds their own thing. That thing becomes a technology island. And now the company has technical debt that, integrating that island back into the mainstream is going to be difficult, hard, and disruptive. And so we've accumulated this habit and created a permission structure around this habit over and over and over again. It's really a challenging situation.
Now, if you look at all of these things, and we do love labels a lot, if you had to put a label on the problem, is it cultural, a tooling issue, or something entirely different?
This is really operational debt. And it's also process debt. And so what we've gotten into this challenge of doing is we've been allowing silos. There's your cultural challenge, where people have a higher priority on delivering a project, getting the final result for their intermediate project, than on integrating that project into the whole of what the IT department has to do. And we've culturally valued, a single department delivering what they need to deliver, over thinking about how the whole system needs to operate. It's interesting. Elliot Goldratt wrote a book about this exact problem, where he talked about the theory of constraints and how every department optimizing their own needs leads everybody to slow down. And that's exactly what we've been seeing. The Phoenix Project, which captured a lot of those same essences, really came back and identified the challenge of having, teams operating individually without that integrated piece speeds people up individually, but as a company, it really slows things down. And when you hit something like a VMware migration challenge, where it's going to hit multiple departments and the departments have no history and experience of working together, that lack of muscle memory on collaborating across teams and compromising across teams, that hits really, really hard. It doesn't help that a lot of corporate big companies have an 18-month to 2-year layoff cycle, and they lose a lot of talent and organizational memory in the mix of all those things. And so, we just watch it over and over and over again. The teams end up clinging to something they're doing in a silo and not wanting to compromise or work with other teams because, they're either they've been burned in the past, it takes more effort to collaborate, it's going to slow them down in the short term. It's really a system-wide problem.
You have seen some companies move fast and do it really well. What's different about their approach that sets them apart from the rest?
You have to recognize that if you're going to invest in people, you also need to pay them more and increase their compensation. We see this like in the early Kubernetes days. Companies needed Kubernetes experts. They'd send their people to training, but they wouldn't increase their salary. And as a consequence, they kept training people in Kubernetes, and those people would then go find jobs at other places where the skills were needed. And so it's important as you reskill people that recognize that, you have to pay them the way you would hire a person that you were hiring with those skills. And that's important. I think we undervalue as a whole people's knowledge of how the systems operate and what people's experience is in how those systems work. A couple of weeks ago, I was telling you a story about how we helped a company, a major bank, transition and rebuild all of their data center infrastructure. And they were able to execute that project. They conceived of it in November. They were already executing it in February. They completed in April, right? It's a huge 40,000 server turnaround. They literally replaced 40,000 servers in their fleet inside from conception to delivery in a 6-month period. And the reason they can do that is because they have rehearsed coordinating across teams. They have also worked with us to outsource knowledge that they didn't want to have to maintain, right? How to manage hardware and bare metal and have standardized processes for that. They recognize that instead of having bespoke processes for their bank, they could leverage standardized processes that we maintained. And that allowed them to lean on those processes and those pieces. And I think that hits something that's worth pointing out here. We have a tendency, especially in IT, to think of process and managed processes and standardized processes as things that slow us down. And the reality on this is that the extent to which your company is able to set and enforce good processes, it actually speeds everybody up because they can work within those processes. Now, there's times when somebody's going to show up and say, this isn't the best process. It's not, the one I'm used to from my previous job, or this isn't the preferred technology or even the best technology, or this process is cumbersome. And we have a tendency to say, then use what you think is best. That then creates new processes that nobody else can support or maintain. What I've seen is the companies that start having more process discipline, more governance, and saying, look, I know this, you don't understand the process right now, but we're going to train you. We're going to help you do it. The process has to be flexible enough to expand, or we're going to work with the vendor who supports that to add things in. Those end up being very effective ways to manage the system. And when you start building on those processes, it really, really does accelerate what you can do. And companies need to look at that and then invest in it.
Now let's talk about AI. We all use AI. It's a powerful tool. It's helping us all a lot. AI is supposed to speed things for enterprise IT. Is it really doing that, or are we just moving the bottleneck somewhere else because we are not taking full advantage, or we have still not figured out how to take full advantage of AI?
It's too soon to tell. The challenge that you can get into is, AI is really good at creating bespoke artifacts. And the thing that we've been watching happen with AI, and we just are only at the beginning of this wave, is that I can have AI write a lot of code for me. I could have AI tell me how to write an Ansible playbook or a Terraform plan or things like that. But what I've done in that case is, while I've written something that works for me, it now is a bespoke artifact. I haven't invested in the reuse. I haven't invested in understanding if somebody else is doing something similar. And right now, AI doesn't have enough context in your own organization to know if it should be reusing, it should be building on, it should be collaborating with. And so we're actually creating a lot of review burden downstream for people. And we're starting to see this in open source projects. AI content where somebody can write tens of thousands of lines of code still has to be reviewed and moderated and checked and validated. And so the extent to which we're seeing that, it's really a problem. I'll give you an example that we see even in content generation, where we have engineers who can write, beautiful documentation or outlines, scripts for videos, and they're building a ton of content. But somebody somewhere has to review that content, has to make sure that it's accurate. And so what we're doing is we're transferring the burden onto the most knowledgeable people who can do those reviews. And those people are starting to feel overwhelmed, and their work is suffering as a consequence. And so there's a bit of a yin and yang here where we're producing a lot of new material, but a lot of IT projects are not about new material, right? We're going back to this whole thing. It's like, okay, get out of my way. I'm going to do it on my own. I'm going to create a silo. I have my own authority, build my own project. I can make it super simple to do that. Somewhere down the line, you're going to have to integrate that back into your other systems. Maybe AI will help you with that, but the amount of context and knowledge that you need to have, the integration, the change that you have to go from the system that was on its own and siloed back into the fold, those battles, those political battles where people, stand up in a meeting and say, we can't do that. It's too risky. You're going to break my whatever. It's going to take us time. It's going to slow us down. That conversation ends up costing companies a lot of money, because the answer is not, well, then we're going to take time and fix it. The answer is often, we can't make a decision. We have to escalate it to somebody higher in the tool chain, or we're just going to live with multiple systems. All of those answers are really, really expensive answers. And as far as I can tell, AI is only making that more challenging, right? That's what people need to be asking as they think about empowering people to do more work with AI. It's how do we bring together all this work in the end?
When a big project gets delayed 6 months or more, what is the actual cost to the business?
Oh my goodness, it can be tremendous. We've seen organizations, and I'll stick mostly to our expertise in the bare metal side. We have seen organizations that literally are just stuck having a single vendor, right? The VMware migration, we see a lot of companies, stalled in their VMware exit plans because moving to a new technology is going to involve too much change and risk and disruption. And so they're paying a lot more money. We see that happen on hardware selection, where customers are locked into a single vendor and they can't change that vendor. They can't even pretend to have competitive pressure on that vendor. And so they pay a premium for the hardware, or they're stuck on less innovative gear or gear that doesn't meet their specific needs because they can't change to a model of gear that might fit better. We saw companies who would have used Supermicro for AI while Supermicro had a leadership position there, but were stuck only in Dell or Cisco or HP and had to wait for those companies to catch up. Right. These are really significant drags in how companies look at their innovation. Right. The project that I was talking about with 40,000 servers, the big challenge here was not actually buying new servers. The big challenge was actually decommissioning your old servers and getting them out of the way. All of these things interlock. And so if you can't clear space by recycling gear out of your data center, or you can't upgrade from, we see customers who are stuck on old versions of VMware or old versions of RHEL or old versions of Windows. If you can't keep up and keep modernizing and patching and running with the latest versions, all of those things translate into not being able to take advantage of features, having security risks and vulnerabilities that you're going to catch up with you. They translate into, having to spend more time patching, maintaining, and checking. Those are incredibly real costs. And that means that you're paying more in power. You can't attract the talent. You can't use the latest technologies. You can't keep up with a feature that might save you, millions and millions of dollars. The costs here are staggering from having slow IT project execution.
Over a period of time, due to many factors, these projects become extremely brittle and fragile, like a house of cards. What is the cause of that?
So one of the things that I really want people to think about when they think about all these systems and projects is because we have all these distributed systems, maybe not well maintained or very isolated, what we've created is a bit of a house of cards for a lot of IT companies where if they change one thing, it creates ripple effects. It's one of the things that's keeping people in VMware, but it creates ripple effects through their whole system. And that fear of a ripple effect makes all of the systems more fragile. Ultimately, systems break, they have to be patched, they have to upgrade. And if you're listening to this, you need to think about how much time you spend in maintenance mode, chasing fires, putting out fires, dealing with a rug pull from another group or another product or some emergency where you then have to go fix the consequences of that emergency, which then might trickle out into other things. A lot of times we just build stronger firewalls or walls between things for this, but that doesn't really ultimately solve the problem. So it's not just the cost here, it's also the inability to make positive changes for things. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy here. But most companies' IT systems are much more fragile than they should be. And people need to think through that it doesn't have to be that way. I think that's the biggest holdup here is people just accepting status quo and not looking and seeing how much more resilient and adaptive and innovative their systems could be.
Now let's talk about VMware because that's your and my favorite topic here. We all know VMware is going through this transition and which is also leading a lot of companies who want to move out of VMware ecosystem. What challenges do they run into?
We see a near universal desire to leave VMware. And I think in some ways that's healthy. VMware has been a dominant locked-in vendor for a long time. Even if you took out the price competitiveness and challenge, it really stifled innovation in IT infrastructure. But what's happened is that because companies have gotten so used to how VMware operates, they're used to a certain architecture. They use tool chains on top of VMware that are hardwired into how VMware operates. And when they go looking in industry for an alternative, there really aren't a lot of clear alternatives for VMware. There are other hypervisors, but to actually slip in and replace VMware, you really don't have a lot of alternatives. Nutanix has been the closest enterprise-grade licensed alternative, but it still doesn't have all of the tooling and pieces that got added into the vSuite and the vCenter components. And so companies that are looking to migrate from VMware to Nutanix are looking at a lot of work for a relatively lateral change. We do see a lot of interest in a strategic alternative, which is OpenShift virtualization or Kubernetes virtualization. That has the same challenge, though. Companies have to learn how to operate that. They have to learn the reference architectures. They have to retrain and tool people. They have to know how to migrate the VMs and recreate the tool chains. So a lot of people looking at the VMware pieces, it's not as simple as I want to yank out VMware and stuff in a different hypervisor. They actually have to morph and change their processes around the systems. Even if they're like, I'm done with on-premises self-managed infrastructure and I want to move it all to cloud. You have the same burden of, locking into a single vendor. There's not a lot of cost advantage or no cost advantage in those cases. And you have to build all the tools and learn how to support and manage all the pieces. So this reskilling piece is a really, really significant deal, and getting companies to align around what they have to reskill and what processes they have to change requires exercising a very collaborative mindset, which takes back to IT executive leadership. You have to keep coming back to, improving process, going through how these systems work, tearing down silos, improving collaboration. It's entirely possible. We watch companies do it, but it takes effort to understand that you're building an integrated system.
I'm a huge fan of open source, and today almost all modern infrastructure relies on open source. How does open source affect speed and delivery?
Well, open source is a two-edged sword when it comes to that in a lot of ways. We were just having an internal conversation at RackN about OpenShift versus Kubernetes, right? And OpenShift does a really nice job of being, very close to upstream Kubernetes, and that's what we would expect it to be. And so the team was asking, well, what value is OpenShift providing if they're mostly upstream Kubernetes? And you have to step back and look at not just support, but the ecosystem, all the components and plugins and integrations and making sure all those pieces work together. That's providing a substantial amount of value. And I think that companies that think of open source as a free ride, where they don't have to pay for the software, they have to do that integration. They have to do the work. And part of doing that work is forming the opinions, having the discipline, understanding how the projects work. If there's an issue, troubleshooting that issue and making it go. I really think that while we're creating a lot of value and shared value in open source, from an enterprise perspective, the idea of leaning on a vendor to do that integration to help you with those pieces is a really significant value proposition. This is something we see all the time in what RackN builds and calls infrastructure pipelines. An infrastructure pipeline is a connection of all of the stages that we have to drive hardware through, up and including operating system install. And we have pipelines that are specialized in AI delivery that do exactly that condition the machines and bring in the libraries and set the GPUs and do RAID and BIOS and do all that conditioning work. The fact that we've, none of that is actually unique or different, right? If you're building AI infrastructure or running bare metal, you have to do all those steps. Somebody's doing that work. Most of our customers have bespoke or hand systems where they're doing that work. The fact that we've pulled those standardized tools, in a lot of cases open source tools, and connected them together and then curate that connection so that we can test it and we can validate it and we can take bugs that we find or new innovations that we find and bring them into those standardized pipelines. That is what's transformative here. That's what's actually turning all this open source technology into benefit. The challenge that we see is that people can take open source technology and build something bespoke for them, and then they get the benefit of the open source technology, but they don't get it's very hard, especially in operations, to get the benefit of a community of shared work. And so we really see vendors in the mix of this being able to take that, build that community, that shared responsibility, and funnel that back into these systems. It's really a key part of how people need to think about open source. It's not just free software. It's never been just free software.
We love to talk about greenfield, but you have also talked about brownfield rack. How does legacy complexity slow things down, even in the modernized environments?
So, I like to think a lot of people think that they're living in a place where they can build a project and it's a greenfield project. Cloud has sort of given us this illusion of it. Every project is brownfield ultimately for enterprises. They have to deal with the way they're doing things. They have to deal with the infrastructure they're in, process and rules and components that they're doing. If anybody who thinks they're running a greenfield project really needs to step back and ask, why am I building a greenfield project? Why am I not taking advantage of all of the processes and controls and standards that my company has built already? And I think we often think of legacy IT and brownfield IT environments with a negative context. The reality is those are really proven environments where you have broader support. You can actually have longevity in running these systems. And I think we have to, have some responsibility as we build projects to sit back and say, how does this fit into my brownfield environment? How do I make sure that this fits in my legacy? How do I use the correct secret stores? How do I integrate to the DNS? How do I have the right certificates and controls? How do I have user authentication? All of these core security capabilities, omitting that actually causes you more long-term harm. It actually creates a lot of cost for your project, and it will ultimately slow you down, speed you up in the very short term when you're getting running. But as you go into production, resolving those things is going to take you more time. It's going to then disrupt your project again. And I really can't emphasize, if people want their projects to go faster, the best way to do that is to invest up front in being part of the production environments in your organization. There's a great example with this. We were talking about, we're helping a pharmaceutical company do a Kubernetes project, OpenShift Kubernetes project. And they are working to build an environment, but the environment they're building is bespoke. It's going to be hand built and custom. And so we're driving back to this question of how do you reset? How do you rebuild your lab environment? How do you tear it down and rebuild it? How often do you do that? And when you ask somebody a question like, okay, we're going to take your lab environment and reset it every night and rebuild it from scratch, they'd be like, whoa, no, I've got all this, specialized hand-built things going on in that lab environment. That is actually slowing you down. Spending the time to make sure that you can actually rebuild your lab environment every day, every hour if you need to, right? If there's an error, instead of fixing the error, actually rebuilding it with the right code in it. That discipline, putting that in up front, is a huge accelerant. What we've seen over and over and over again is that when we show up to companies where they have a custom process, they have specialized labs, the labs don't look like production. All of those things which they think make the lab go faster only are really temporary improvements. They're not actually creating long-term sustainable value. And ultimately, those labs are much slower than when we take time, we take a week, 2 weeks to actually build the infrastructure so that they can do those dynamic resets. Once those are in place, that's what powers accelerated IT projects. That discipline up front is transformative in the long-term life of that project. And people really need to get over this idea that, they're starting a project is different than ending a project. That's the key, right? You need to make sure that you're always in that accelerative mode.
A lot of people think that if you throw a lot of tools at the problem, it will solve itself, but that's not how it works. Why doesn't throwing a lot of tools at a problem actually work?
There's two schools of thought here. One of them is simplicity. And I've been in a lot of projects where the idea that we were just going to remove complexity from the project was going to make things simpler. That's one of the ways we get into these very siloed answers. The thing that I've found over time is that complexity is not something you can make go away. IT is inherently complex. Real systems have complexity. That complexity is necessary, right? You don't want to not be able to set the BIOS for a server. It's important to be able to set the BIOS for a server so that you can configure it correctly and patch it and update it. You can't make those things go away. You might give them to somebody else like cloud, but they're not really that hard, and thinking that complexity is unnecessary and can be removed is actually costing you something. And so what we've seen over and over and over again is that the way you manage complexity is by building a good process, by running those processes over and over again. The more you drive your systems, the more you can do that reset that I was just talking about. That actually reduces your complexity. It doesn't really reduce the complexity. It improves your ability to manage that complexity. And I really think that people need to think through how they look at these systems. And rather than seeing a complex system and thinking it's wrong, they need to think of the complex system and think about, how do I create standardized automation and good process controls? How do I drive a process across my systems over and over and over again, right? This is all classic DevOps methodology, but it's true. We have to rethink this approach. The legacy systems that people get so afraid about, they're legacy because they've dealt with that complexity. They've managed it. You have to invest the time to get over that hump. That then will translate into your acceleration in the future. We have to stop being afraid of initial complexity and work with it.
Every conversation with you is a learning experience to those who are watching. But if I ask you, if you had to give one piece of advice to leaders who want to speed up execution and they want to take advantage of AI, automation, open source, what would that advice be?
The first thing that I tell people, we see this because we see a connection between speed, choice, change, and scale. And so as customers do better with scale and change management, they improve in speed and having more choice. it's an iterative process. And so what I would suggest for people is they need to understand that when they make improvements in change management, they're going to see improvements in how they can scale. Improvements in scale mean better speed, right? They have to be able to take incremental steps to keep working through these processes. That's really important. The other thing that we've done very deliberately as we built Digital Rebar, and I find this to be a good architectural principle in general, is we work to make it easier to do good process. So when we build the product, we work to make it actually easier to deliver content packs and immutable automation, to have clear dev test prod capabilities, right? We actually have built the system in a way that rewards good process controls, that reward strong governance. And you want to look for tools that encourage that behavior so that your team is constantly moving towards stronger process controls, better repetition, making it easier to do that reset, repeat, rather than change and change into production. That type of discipline is something that you want your tools to reinforce, you want your teams to reinforce. So you have to be looking at this system as the better I am reinforcing and everybody's collaborating around the discipline of having my systems very production-like and making that pipeline very easy. Those components are reinforced. It's interesting. We talk about this in development a lot, not as much in ops and operations and infrastructure. The disciplines that we're talking about are the same thing that we've seen incredible results in DevOps and DevSecOps in the development sphere. It's time to do the same thing in operations. So very clear guidance that these processes, these disciplines result in tremendous ROI.
Rob, it's always great talking with you. I think a lot of teams will recognize the traps you described and hopefully take some steps to get out of them. If your company has cracked the code on speeding up IT delivery, we would love to hear from you. We would love to host you along with Rob on this show. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next conversation. Thank you.